way the synagogue was situated on Hunter and Park, it was down below there was a big, huge white wall with bricks, about 3 by 3 in size, and then there was a stairway going up from the sidewalk up to Hunter Street, and you could hear the trains going underneath the tunnel. So that the geographical memory is there. Then the inside, as I look back on it, was very cozy. It would have real wooden benches, and the upstairs where the balcony where the ladies sat was it was quite intimate, and the bima and the Shulchan Aruch were all good carved wood, and geographically I remember it with a lot of pleasantness and delight, actually. And the people that I liked when I was a kid, all the people were nice, you know. And they were all characters. There were lots of characters. The older men were funny in their own way. They each had their eccentricities. Or a Pagan would cough in a way that would shake the building. Other in Yom Kippur, some people brought little tins of snuff. Some wore running shoes. So it was a delight for me. And those were happy days. I remember on Simchas Torah going up and tying the knots in the Talesim, getting candies. And we were allowed to run around down below in the vestry room. So I don't have any bad memories.
Well, you talked about characters. Can you?
Well, there was Ora Pekin, and Mr. Pinkovitz used to spit on the floor. He sat behind me and he would snort and then let one fly. Rube Levy used to walk around like he was the warden of the prison. He used to put his hands behind his back, and his tallis was waving. And there were a few displaced people that came right after the war. And for example, the owners of the butcher shop, one just died recently, Saul Cohen, and his partner David, I forget his last name. And then Leon the barber, they came to the synagogue one Saturday morning, and they were given Leahs because they, had escaped the Holocaust. So those are some of the people that I remember. Mr. Davidovitz was the shamus. He used to walk around the synagogue, very quiet, little small man, and. Rube Levy's family were directly opposite my grandfather's benches. And Ruby sat there with his 4 sons, and they were all well behaved. Cecil, Bobby, Morty, and who was the 4th one? Label, right, Label Levy. So they were all, and we all knew each other, and everybody was friendly. And
how often would people go to Shul in those days?
Well, they had minions in the morning and at night. They said Kaddish 7 days a week. I remember when my grandfather died, my Uncle Howard would go down York Street to recruit people to go up to the synagogue for a minyan, say on a Wednesday night. So there was a little chapel off the vestry room too, where they said Kaddish. I can remember going there. And they had Shalshitas every Saturday night. Rabbi Burak would explicate a passage from the Talmud or something that had just been read recently. And it was very Hamish, and there was no threatening. I don't remember anybody getting angry at the kids, and the kids were noisy too, rambunctious. So it was a pleasant place to be.
How old were you in those years?
Oh, I guess that started around 7, 8, 9, and all the way up.
Any rabbis or cantors stand out in your mind?
Yeah, Rabbi Katz. My father was in the auto parts business, and he sold little accessories for the home. One of them was Christmas tree lights and wreaths that blinked off and on. So one Christmas I took one home, a wreath, and I put it up in the attic in the window and let her fly. And my father got a phone call from one of the neighbors saying, "I didn't know you celebrated Christmas, Murray." And he said, "I don't." And he said, "Well, you got a wreath up in the attic window." So they found the wreath and decided to call Rabbi Katz, who was the rabbi, to come to the house to talk to me about why Jews don't celebrate Christmas.
Do you remember what he said?
He said, "We each have our own holidays, and we celebrate them in different ways, and we don't celebrate it the same way the Gentiles do." He was pretty good about it. So then at Easter I got a crucifix and put it on the roof.
I don't believe you.
No, I didn't. I'm just kidding.
Tell me, you talked about Rabbi Burak.
Yeah, a big formative influence in my life.
Say more about that.
Well, Rabbi Burak was an extremely devout man, and he literally lived his beliefs. So you could feel the intensity of his devotion and his dedication. And he used to smile whenever I came. I used to get a ride to Shul every Saturday, and I would sit with my grandfather, and Rabbi Burak would look over and he would nod, as though to say, "You're a good boy for doing that." And I can remember him giving sermons where he would weep and cry about somebody who had died. And he was very bright. He had a PhD in history, and he could get very subtle, and he moved through a text with lots of intelligence, and he saw the implications, and he was a superb teacher. And I can still remember him saying the prayers at my grandfather's funeral in the cemetery.
What year was that?
1948. So Rabbi Burak was a big presence. And then there was the Tefillin Club, and he came to that and led that for us.
What was the Tefillin?
Well, every Sunday we came to Shul, and they had Sunday breakfast, and then we put on tefillin before all the new bar mitzvah bochers put on their tefillin, and then they had a breakfast for us there. And he came and talked to us, etc.
Every Sunday?
Yeah.
So in those days, the kids, the boys would have their bar mitzvah and they would continue to...
Yeah, that's right. They would come to the Tefillin Club, put on tefillin on Sunday mornings. That's the picture I gave you. 2 pictures.
So the synagogue moved to Aberdeen Avenue in 1954, I believe. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do.
Can you say, what was that like? What?
Well, my father was one of the organizers of the move and building the new synagogue.
Who was your father?
Murray Rosenblood. And I remember him telling the family about the arguments they would have about where to site the synagogue. He said one guy wanted to put it on Queen Street going up the mountain. And he said, "Can you imagine what would happen if you had a funeral in the middle of January and there was a snowstorm, you wouldn't get there?" So he was very passionate about that, and it was they were all excited about it, but at the same time it was mixed emotions, because the Beth Jacob Synagogue on Hunter Street was beloved, and it was a place of strong, vivid memories, and there was a Hamish quality about it, that it wasn't streamlined, it wasn't too small. So it was mixed emotions to go to the new synagogue.
It must have been a huge change to go.
Oh yeah, huge, massive change to go from Hunter Street to Aberdeen. Many felt disappointed. I know there are several people who were disappointed. Fortunately, they took a lot of the benches from the Hunter Street and put them down in the chapel with the old Shulchan Aruch as well. So that was a bit of a rescue operation. And I know when I used to go to say Kaddish for yurtsites, etc., it was always gratifying to be able to sit there in those benches because they brought back a lot of memories.
What they didn't take, and what just resurfaced after 59 years, were those stained glass windows.
Yeah, that's marvelous that you found those.
What's interesting, though, is that, I mean, I understand why they didn't take them, because I don't think they could. They sold the building apparently to the Hellenic Society.
Yeah.
So the only way to have taken the only way to have taken those windows was to have destroyed the window. So clearly they didn't want to do that. But what I'm starting to think about is they completely forgot about them, because 10 years later the building was torn down. And
Yeah.
nobody even knew at that point, oh, Beth Jacob. Nobody had communicated. They were like out of sight, out of mind. And it
Yeah.
was only serendipity that they ended up being saved.
Yeah, well, it's a marvelous thing that they were saved. The Beth Jacob had big front doors too, big swinging front door. Did you ever see them?
No, but I heard about them.
Yeah, and the day of my grandfather's funeral, they drove the hearse drove by the synagogue as a way of saying for him to say goodbye, and they opened the doors of the synagogue, and I still remember that. No, it was a very it was like another home in a way.
Did you feel that way about the Aberdeen Avenue?
No,
How old were you when they moved to Aberdeen?
must have been about 16 or 17.
So you never felt that same emotional connection?
No.
Did you stop going to Shul at that point?
Yeah, I didn't stop entirely. Like many Jews, I went on the high holidays, the other Yom Tovim, but no, I didn't stop completely.
But your formative Jewish education took place in the Hunter Street.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
What kind of Jewish education did they have there?
Well, it wasn't there. They also had a Talmud Torah on John Street. And I used to go to the Talmud Torah, which was an adventure to go from Westdale down to John Street, off Barton Street, because you had to take 2 streetcars, you had to transfer, and then there was we were always getting in fights with gangs that lived there, and it was more than an adventure. It was a bit of a entry into warfare. So. And the way of teaching was not good, because they taught you to memorize and to read Hebrew without having any knowledge of what you were reading. So it was by rote, and I think it was severely inadequate. So that education really didn't do much for me. The real education came from the neshama that was in the Beth Jacob synagogue on Hunter Street. I still remember the songs. They still come back to me every once in a while. Erech Apayim, V'rov Chesed Ve'emes, Notzer Le'elo Afim.
What was the tune?
Oh, I'm not going to sing it for you.
Because I know that, but maybe it's not the same tune.
It's right around the taking out of the Torah before the readings.
So who taught you your bar mitzvah portion?
Rabbi Lichtiger.
Tell me about
Well,
him.
he's in the picture that I gave you of the bar mitzvah dinner. He was a marvelous man too. He was a bachelor at the time. He was trying to court a woman that lived in the house where he boarded. He boarded in the Leibtag's house on Murray Street. And they had a daughter. Her name was Rose. And she was, to me, she was cute and good looking and obviously to him too. And he taught me my mufter, and he had a lot of humor, and he was a decent, good-hearted man. And he was studying, he influenced me because he was studying for his exams at McMaster. And I didn't understand what university meant at that time, but he conveyed to me that it was important. And he would tell me about some of his experiences with the professors who taught Hebrew out at McMaster. So he was a positive influence too. Rabbi Lichtiger, Rabbi Burak.
Were they both there at the same time?
Yeah.
So Rabbi Burak was the pulpit rabbi, and Rabbi Lichtiger was what?
He was the head of the Talmud Torah.
So Beth Jacob did have a Talmud Torah.
No, the Talmud Torah was separate. Rabbi Lichtiger was the head of the Talmud Torah on John Street. Two separate buildings. The Talmud Torah, by the way, was right across the road from Marvin Goldblatt's uncle, grandfather, Jacob. And I can remember the year that he died. There was quite a lot of traffic going into the house. Their house was right on John Street, across from the Talmud Torah. Marvin and Abi and Sori grew up in that house.
That was Frank and Dolly's house.
Yes. No. Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Maybe Frank and maybe they had a different residence.
Jacob lived on Robert Street.
Well, who lived on John?
Frank and Dolly.
Did they? Ah. So I thought it was Jacob's house, so I'm mistaken.
Jacob lived at 75 Robert Street.
That's where the business started, and they had offices there later on. I see. So Frank and Dolly lived on John Street.
That's where Marvin grew up.
I see, right. Yeah, it was a very imposing house.
It's still there.
The brick railing, the front,
Yeah.
the kind of posts. Yeah, dark brown brick. And there was a marvelous fish and chip shop on the corner. You get a bag of chips for a nickel.